I'm Sam Cordes here at my home in Chicago in 2018. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes introducing you to the Cordes Family Oral History Project. Family is, of course, important. History is also important. Let me combine those two ideas, family and history. I've always loved history, and I was also very fortunate to grow up in a very loving and caring family and had 6 siblings that were very special and remain very special to me. One of the things that I have thought over the years is that I wish that I had a better record of some of the stories and remembrances that my parents shared with me, but I didn't have any way of capturing them. So about almost 3 years ago, I decided to undertake this project and capture, beginning right now, so that we don't have future loss, of the experiences, the memories, the relationships, the stories that define us and our family. So that's what started the project, and it divides into really 2 areas. One is what I call the geographical trail of the Cordes family. Places, communities that were important, beginning with my grandparents. And then the second part, which is really the heart of the project, are the interviews that I conducted with each of my 6 siblings, and my niece Wendy Abbott was the one that interviewed me. Our ground rules for those interviews were basically share as much or as little as you want, the good, the bad, the ugly. And we had a kind of a rough outline or script that we used to guide our conversations, but we deviated from that quite a bit. But let me begin right here this morning with the geography of the family, and we'll begin on my dad's side, the Cordes family, the Cordes name, which ironically, in terms of America, our Cordes family name was first established and set right here in the city where I currently live. For a period of about 2 to 3 years is where it all started, and we'll begin there. Good morning. Here I am on this beautiful summer morning, Lake Michigan and some of the Chicago skyline behind me. Chicago can be thought of as the American birthplace of our Cordes heritage and family. I've learned of its importance in family history after combing through various documents and also spending time in the research department at the Chicago Historical Society. Here is what I've pieced together. The first family member to arrive from Germany was our great aunt, Elise Cordes, who arrived in the U.S. in May of 1872 with her husband, August Westphal. It appears they made their way to Chicago in fairly short order from New York, probably because there was plenty of work available for August, who was a carpenter, and Chicago needed plenty of carpenters as it was rebuilding after the infamous fire of 1871, which left 100,000 Chicagoans homeless. 3 of Elisa's siblings, including our grandfather, arrived 1 year later. In fact, he and his brother Fred arrived in New York Harbor on the very same day, albeit on different ships. Their younger sister Anna had arrived only a few days earlier. So, our grandfather and all of his siblings who migrated to the U.S., only one stayed in Germany, by the way, they all settled here in Chicago. Interestingly, Anna and Fred were married here on the same date, not to each other, of course, on February 21, 1875. Later that same year, our grandfather and his 3 siblings left Chicago for Taylor County, Iowa. So, during a 3-year period beginning in 1872, the city of Chicago was the new American home for every single one of our relatives. Our grandfather, our great-uncle Fred, and our 2 great aunts, Elise and Anna. Although Grandpa Cordes moved on to Taylor County, Iowa, and then on to Dakota Territory, his connection to Chicago did not end. Grandpa was a cattle and horse trader, and the railroad had reached Rapid City in 1886, just 4 years after he and Grandma Cordes had moved to Dakota Territory. Because he was a horse trader and cattle trader, and because of the rail connectivity, he would continue to come to Chicago, as Chicago's famous Union stockyards caused the city to become known as the hog butcher of the world. I also remember my dad telling me about Grandpa Cordes attending the 1893 World's Fair, which was held in Chicago. There are other stories that my father passed along to me about his dad and his dad's experience coming to and from Chicago. One story I remember is that Grandpa Cordes brought back to Rapid City pears. This was a fruit that my father was not familiar with, had never heard about them, and he just loved them. And he said he ate 2 or 3 right away, but he ate the whole thing. He wasn't even aware that you were not supposed to eat the core. Another story that is interesting is when I was growing up on the ranch out by Elm Springs. One morning I was out with my father, and we had a windmill, and the fin on the windmill was manufactured by a company called Aeromotor. I was probably in about the 2nd grade, and I was learning how to pronounce words phonetically. And underneath the manufacturer Aerometer, it said made in Chicago. I asked my dad, I said, "Where is Chicago? Where is Chicago?" And my dad got a huge kick out of that. He thought that was pretty funny and appreciated the fact that I was learning how to pronounce and read phonetically. But he did correct me and say, it is not Chicago. It happens to be Chicago. Well, it's an interesting and special place to me, for me, now that I live in the city, which is not only our family's birthplace here in the U.S., but also the magnificent city our grandfather and our great uncle actually helped build, or more correctly, rebuild, after the 1871 fire. I guess the circle is now complete with me being here. I've totally fallen in love with Chicago and cannot imagine living anywhere else. Maybe it was some family spirits that have helped make me feel that special connection. Although there's just one generation between me and my grandfather, it has taken about 150 years to close that circle. So let's go see where Grandpa Cordes and his sister and brother-in-law were living while helping to rebuild Chicago. Where they were living is only about a mile as a crow flies from where Trish and I now live. 1660 North Dayton Street. This is the address where Grandpa Cordes lived for at least 1 year, perhaps 2 years, with his sister Elise and her husband August Westfall. It's May 30th, 2018. This is the day, by the way, that my mother died, and tomorrow is my dad's birthday, and Trish always had this idea, and I love it, that she had to leave a day early to get up to heaven to help get ready for his birthday. The reason I'm here, though, in this particular setting is it is an important part of the Cordes history. Grandpa Cordes, after leaving Germany in 1873, fairly quickly migrated to Chicago. Now, how do I know that? Well, there's stuff written about that in the family history books. But in the last 4 years since I've been living here, Tricia and I've spent some time at the Chicago History Museum, and they have a directory of residences, much like telephone directories, although this was in the day before telephones. They just simply listed everyone that lived in the city. And they did those every year. So I started looking through the directories, and there were quite a few Cordeses, quite a few being 8 or 10 or something each year, including several Henrys, my grandfather's name. But I finally figured out that the year that he spent, roughly a year I think, in Chicago, was at this very residence behind me, 1660 North Dayton. At that point in time, it had a different number and a different street name, but working with the people at the History Museum, I've determined that this is where he lived and worked. Where he worked. Why was he working here? Well, in 1871, a couple of years before his arriving in Chicago, Chicago had its Great Fire. It turns out that my grandfather's older sister Elise had already come to the United States and was living in Chicago and married to August Westphal. In looking through those directories, I found this address for August Westphal, and lo and behold, also a listing. That noise in the background, by the way, is the Chicago L. It's wonderful, and it makes a nice racket. August Westphal married Grandpa Cordes' older sister, and they were already living in Chicago. And August was a carpenter, according to the directory, and my dad, Henry, was listed as a laborer and living at this same address. So this is where Grandpa Cordes worked for, I don't know, maybe a year or so before moving on to Iowa, and then of course ultimately to South Dakota. Today this is a very nice neighborhood in Chicago. We're about 3 miles roughly from the heart of the city, and it's pretty cool for me to be standing where my grandfather, some 150 years ago, got up every morning and headed down, somehow walked probably the 3 miles to where he was in the process of helping to rebuild this great and wonderful city that I now call home. And we looked on the real estate page, and each of those apartments will be selling for at least $1.25 million. Now, the street is very, very nice, and there are some wonderful old buildings here, some of which may have been here even when Grandpa Cordes was here, who knows. But at that point in time, I'm sure there were dirt streets, muddy streets, board sidewalks at the best, and it probably did not look nearly as attractive as it does here today. And I am sure that he was not prepared to pay at least $1.25 million for one of these units, which would have a couple of, or maybe 3 units within each building today. Just to give you a little feel for the neighborhood and the street, Dayton Street, let me pan around here and you can see what's going on. Very nice homes, nicely landscaped, flowers. And as we look down this way, the street ends right where the L goes overhead, and if I can, there is a shot of the track at the end of Dayton Street where one of the L trains that Chicago is known for goes by. Oh, and maybe there it is, it's coming. Oh my goodness. How lucky can I be? Dayton Street is a dead end, and so I'm now looking the other direction. Grandpa Cordes' house is maybe a couple hundred feet up on the left, and you just saw the L that Chicago is famous for go by. And also, if I can get it here, a shot of, there's Chicago's flag, and what just went by, of course, was the L that Chicago is famous for, and there's the Chicago flag. And this particular place I'm standing, I'm looking back up Dayton Street, some 200 feet probably north of here on the left would be Grandpa Cordes' house or address at 1660 North Dayton. Well, having shared the arrival and early footprint of Grandpa Cordes and his siblings in America, Chicago specifically, let's now turn to Grandma Cordes. Emma Jane Weber. She was born in 1859 in McGregor, Iowa, which is located in Clayton County. Clayton County is in northeastern Iowa. Its eastern boundary is the Mississippi River, with Wisconsin sitting right across the Mississippi. And if you were to drive north some 40 to 50 miles, you would be in the far southeastern part of Minnesota. Clayton County's population today is about 18,000. Its population peaked around 30,000 in the late 1800s. That's about the time Grandma Cordes left here for southwestern Iowa to teach school. This area of Iowa, and I've traveled through it on many occasions over the years, is known as the Little Switzerland. There aren't any real mountains, but there are substantial hills, and the bluffs along the Mississippi River make it quite picturesque. In the wintertime, snowmobilers and cross-country skiers flock here. The county has several towns that have names that are very Germanic or Central European, such as Gutenberg, Luxembourg, and Volga. Well, let's take a look at the mighty Mississippi and then venture into McGregor, where Grandma Cordes was born and raised. It's May the 6th, and I'm on the Mississippi River. The town of McGregor, where Grandma Cordes was born, is on the Mississippi. And here is a shot of that area. A barge going up the river. The small sister city of Marquette, not that McGregor's very big, is off there in the background. I'm now going to go to downtown McGregor and take a little footage there. Well, here I am on May the 6th on Main Street in McGregor, Iowa. A town right on the Mississippi River. Right across the Mississippi is the larger town of Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, established by the French, I'm sure, with a name like that. This is a sweet little main street, lots of nice little boutiques and shops, and I suspect they cater to the tourism industry, and there's a large casino gambling boat here on the Mississippi River. Now, in terms of family history, this is where Grandma Cordes, Emma Jane Weber, pronounced Weber, I suppose in German, was born in 1859. She received her teaching certificate at the age 16, almost 17, and then she migrated to Taylor County, Iowa. Grandma Cordes' parents were married here, so there is quite a history of the Cordeses. This town is a small town of about 900 people. Once upon a time it had more than 2,000 folks. Also the home of the Ringling Brothers, of the famous Ringling Brother Circus, and Frank Lloyd Wright hung out here quite a bit as a very young child. One of the mysteries to me is in Grandma Cordes' diary, she talked about how much she missed her family, which would have been her family here in McGregor, Clayton County. And she was 350 miles away up in southwestern Iowa. So here we are in the northeast corner of Iowa. She is teaching in the southwest corner, which is about as far as you can be in this state, about 350 miles. And in that day and age, transportation being what it was, I don't suspect she got back and forth very often. So I wonder why she chose to teach in Taylor County. Now, it could have been that was the only position available, but it would seem strange that there were no positions closer than the furthest part of Iowa for her to secure teaching employment. Or maybe she had other teaching positions between the time her teaching certificate was issued in 1876 and she was teaching in Taylor County. Well, we know she was teaching there in 1881-82 because that is when her diary began. But anyway, that's a a curiosity question that will probably always be a curiosity question because I suspect no one has the answer to that. Well, lo and behold, I thought I was finished with McGregor, but on my way out of town, I saw a couple of buildings that caught my attention. Here is the building that must have been one of the first, probably the first, newspaper, North Iowa Times, 1856, 3 years before Grandma Cordes was born. And even more importantly, over here is a building, 1857, and as you can see, it is named Uncle Sam's Saloon. I love that, and I'm so thankful for Grandma Cordes that she was prescient enough to name that after me. We just finished completing a tour of northeastern Iowa, where Grandma Cordes was born and raised. So now let's shift diagonally across the state of Iowa to southwestern Iowa, Taylor County. Taylor County borders Missouri on the south and is not far from Nebraska on the west. And this is the county where my grandparents on my father's side met and married. Grandpa Cordes arrived here about 1875 after spending a year or two in Chicago. Grandma Cordes arrived here a year or two after that from Clayton County to teach school. In Grandma Cordes' diary, she makes reference to getting acquainted with, I'm quoting here, a funny Dutchman, which would have been my grandfather Cordes. That diary entry is February 20th, 1882. Interestingly, just 66 days later, they were married. He was 35 years old and she was 21. Just 1 week after they were married, they left for Dakota Territory and spent the rest of their lives in or near Rapid City. Grandma Cordes died in 1941 at the age of 81, and Grandpa Cordes in 1943 at the age of 96. My grandfather's 3 siblings moved here to Taylor County from Chicago also, but they spent the entire rest of their lives here. And if my math is correct, Grandpa Cordes called Taylor County home for 7 to 8 years, and Grandma Cordes for about 5 years. A few minutes ago, I said it was a mystery to me why Grandma Cordes would leave Clayton County, where she had grown up, to teach in Taylor County, which is about 350 miles away. Well, it may have been, I just thought of something, that her parents moved to Taylor County about the same time. I say that for 2 reasons. First, genealogical records show Grandma Cordes had a brother who was born in Taylor County in 1880. And second, Grandma Cordes mentions in her diary that her marriage to my grandfather occurred in her parents' home here in this county. So that mystery is now solved. Just a little bit about Taylor County. It's right on the Missouri border. It currently has a little over 6,000 people. At the time that my grandparents lived here, it had more than twice that. The population peaked in 1900 at 3 times that, about 18,000. It's lost population every single year since then for, well, almost 120 years now. It's geographically a relatively small county. It's square, about 25 miles by 25 miles. I looked at a telephone directory that covers this entire area, not just Taylor County, but beyond, all of the little communities. Could not find a single Cordes listed, so they are no more, apparently, unless they had a cell phone, which wouldn't be listed in the landline directory. Well, with that, I'm going to knock around Taylor County a little bit more and see if I can find anything else that might be of interest. One of the many small communities in Taylor County, most of them have seen their better days, but one of them is Gravity, and I must compliment the town leaders for their creativity and what they have to say about their community. I'm now in Bedford, Iowa, which is the county seat of Taylor County, and it's only 5 or 6 miles from the Missouri state line. This courthouse was built in 1892, which would have been 10 years after Grandma and Grandpa Cordes were married here in Taylor County at the home of my Grandma Cordes' parents, my great grandparents. Bedford is a sleepy town of about 1,500 souls. Well, I'm facing the main street with the courthouse in the background. Main Street has 3 blocks, and I just finished walking up the 3 blocks of Main Street, and there's exactly 9 cars on them, and it's a Saturday night. This little area here has 2 or 3 neat little shops, and then there is this beautiful mural that I'm about to show here. It's absolutely gorgeous, so well done. But beyond that, I don't see too much action here in Bedford on Saturday night. Before coming down to Taylor County today, I did a little internet research, and I have reason to believe there's some family history here at this church and cemetery, so that's where I will go next. Well, here I am at the Gus Cemetery. I'm going to scope things out and see what I can find. Let me just pan around here and you can get a little sense of the countryside. This is not the productive flat Iowa that many people think of. I've been across this part of the state before, not exactly here, but it, as I mentioned, it butts up against Missouri, so it's rolling hills, quite a few trees, and some small cattle and pastures, but mainly farming, but not the flat productive land that you'll find in other parts of Iowa. I had occasion to visit with a local farmer, and on this side of the road there is farm ground, and on the other side is pasture land and a nice green pasture for the cattle. And he says that this part of Iowa should never have been farmed, and he thinks it belongs to pasture and cows. Well, it's my lucky day here at the Gus Cemetery. Look what I have found. I will try to walk you through what I have pieced together. Here lies my great uncle Fred, who arrived in the U.S. the same day as his brother, our Grandpa Cordis. Fred married Dorothea, or Dora Cordis. Yes, her last name was Cordis before she married our great uncle in Chicago. It sounds a little scandalous. If I understand the genealogy correctly, they were second cousins, maybe. And here lies our Grandpa Cordis's younger sister, Anna, who would be our great aunt. She married Fred Fruick in Chicago on the same day as her brother, Fred, married Dorothea, or Dora Cordis. Well, here is my final find. Grandpa Cordis had the younger sister, Anna, whose grave I've already visited. He also had an older sister, Elise, that married August Westfall. And they apparently had, this would be Dad's aunt and uncle, aunt by blood, uncle by marriage. I'm sorry, yes, that would be right. Nearby are the graves of Emma Westfall and Matilda Westfall. I'm not quite sure where they fit in. They're probably the daughters of Elise and August. I do remember Dad telling about the longest name in Cordis history. And it was, and he asked me to memorize it. So here's to you, Dad. Etta, Betty, Dora, Freda, Rika, Westfall, Cordis. Oh my, another find, quite close but not adjacent to where that large Cordis marker is the gravestone of Maurice and Gertrude Cordis. I do believe I remember Dad mentioning Maurice. That would have been his first cousin. I think once upon a time when Dad and Mother were down in this part of the country, maybe visiting Carolyn and Balva when they were in Omaha, they came over here and spent time with Maurice. At least that name is familiar. And nearby is the gravestone of, right adjacent to Maurice and Gertrude, is a gravestone of Alice Cordes McFarland. I'm just speculating here that this may be their daughter, who is still alive at the age of 86 and would be my second cousin. As you can see, the Gus Cemetery is a treasure trove of Cordes family history. Specifically, this is where all three of our grandfather's siblings who came to the United States are buried. Let me close with a final interesting tidbit I discovered. I knew our Grandpa Cordes served in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and 71, but I did not know his brother Fred and his two brother-in-laws also served. If you know a bit about German history, it's not surprising they all migrated to the U.S. shortly after the end of the Franco-Prussian War. You see, Germany as we know it today did not exist at all until 1871, when the German nation was created by Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck had been president of the Kingdom of Prussia, and under his leadership, many smaller kingdoms were annexed. One of the kingdoms he annexed was Hanover, and most Hanoverians, and that likely included all of our relatives, hated Bismarck and the Prussians. But they were compelled to take Prussian military training and fight against the French in the Franco-Prussian War. After Prussia prevailed in that war, our relatives probably decided it was time to leave rather than continue to be a pawn for the Bismarck and his rapidly growing military prowess and ambitions. Well, let's now turn to our mother's side of the family. Both of her parents were born here in Grayson County, Virginia. Sam Funk, our grandfather, was born on November 16, 1880, and our grandma, Carrie Cox, was 3 years younger, having been born on June 6, 1883. They were childhood friends and classmates. Grandpa Funk left Grayson County in 1900 to seek his fortune in the Black Hills of South Dakota. After about 2 years, he returned to Grayson County and became engaged to our grandmother, Carrie Cox. He then returned to the Black Hills, and after a couple of years, she joined him in 1904, and they were married in Hot Springs, South Dakota on February 16th of that year. Now, Grayson County is in southwestern Virginia, bordering the North Carolina state line. We still have second cousins and third cousins, at least on the Funk side, living here in Grayson County. I do remember Grandma Funk often talking about Grayson County and its beauty in the Blue Ridge Mountains and the town of Independence, which is the county seat and only about 4 miles from the North Carolina state line. Grayson County is a small county, about 20 miles by 20 miles. Its current population is about 16,000. It's been losing population since 1940 because it is a very economically depressed area. When the settlers first arrived here from the eastern part of Virginia in the mid to late 1700s, they had small plots of land enough to feed their families. There was also a bit of mining and some lumbering because of the heavy forestation in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Eventually, lumbering transformed into furniture making. Also, textiles, clothing, garment manufacturing became major industry, and Grayson County's heyday was associated with these two industries of furniture and textiles. But the county has since fallen on some pretty hard times, and that helps explain the declining population for the past 80 years or so. On the very edge of Grayson County is the town of Galax, and I remember Grandma Funk talking about it because that was their big city. Currently, I think it has a population of 6,000 or something like that. However, she grew up closer to the county seat and smaller town of Independence on a little plot of land near Bridle Creek, which she often mentioned and where I plan to visit next. Grandma always missed the beauty and greenery of this area, the flowers, the trees that are everywhere. It's green. It's very beautiful, albeit not a prosperous area. This area is also known as a home of the old-time bluegrass and mountain music, and that's an important part of its culture and history here in Grayson County and the surrounding area. The people here take great pride in that part of their culture. they are now turning it into an economic asset, with many communities having music festivals and that type of thing. Politically, it's a hotbed for Republicans. In 2016, Trump carried the county with about 77% of the vote, far surpassing Trump's margin in our home state of South Dakota, which is also very hardcore Republican, but nothing compared to Grayson County. I suspect Trump was able to tap into the economic anxiety and lack of prosperity in this area, promising to bring back factory and manufacturing jobs, which is what once made Grayson County much more prosperous than is the case today. So that's a bit about the history and contemporary situation here in Grayson County, the birthplace and childhood homes of our grandparents on our mother's side of the family. As I mentioned, when I first entered Grayson County, Galax, the city, is right on the very edge of the county, but not in the county. And this isn't the area where bluegrass, mountain music, fiddling is originated in a sense, and they are very, very proud of that part of their culture. I thought this is an interesting story of this little town. It is not pronounced Fries, it's pronounced Freeze. It was called to my attention by the local historian, and I just thought I would drive through it here in Grayson County, right on the banks of the New River. This tells the story as to how it was founded, and at one point in its heyday, the mill employed 2,000 people. It was a company town, but Mr. Freeze was very, very good to his employees, at least according to the guy that I talked to. And even during the Depression, he made sure that they had work, at least on a part-time basis. And then this connection to country and bluegrass music from this part of Virginia is also noted here. It's right on the banks of the New River, of course, off to my right. I'm still here in Freeze, and this sign has reference to the trail being the trail of country, or at least bluegrass music, and how it is a trail of communities around this area of Virginia, each of which has a connection to bluegrass, country music, has festivals, and so on. Off to the right is an interesting scene of the New River. And you can see the falls that are created by this dam. I don't know if this is the dam that was used for the mill when it was operating at full speed. The mill is of course gone, or if this is now part of a hydroelectric project or something like that. But anyway, it's kind of a cool view of the New River and the falls. I'm in Galax, Virginia, and this building gives you an indication of the economic depression that this area of the state is facing, and has for quite a while. I think this was a furniture manufacturing establishment at one point in time, but it's shuttered and has been, I think, for some time. And gosh, it must stretch down there almost a quarter of a mile. I suppose at some point in time it employed hundreds, if not thousands of people. No longer the case. I'm just going to slowly drive along here and capture a picture of some of the economic difficulties. I mentioned that the economics here aren't all that great. And here's kind of an example of some pretty difficult living situations. Here's something I didn't expect. There is a growing Christmas tree industry in Grayson County, and here's an example of it. Well, I'm now in Independence, Virginia. This is the county seat of Grayson County. As the plaque indicates, the courthouse that I will show here in a second was built in 1908. It's a beautiful old historical piece of architecture. I also, though, wanted to go here and look at a memorial to World War I and World War II veterans, and you cannot see the individual names on the camera, I'm sure, but I can. And there were, let me see, in World War I, there was one Cox who was killed in action, and in World War II, there were 2. I'll walk on down here, and you can get a better look at the courthouse and how beautiful it is. Also, over to my right is a building, and it is the Cox building, which I found of interest, if I can get my camera over there. Yeah, this is just an ordinary kind of a 2-story building on Main Street, but it's interesting that it was built by the Cox family. And I was in the courthouse and spent a nice amount of time with the head of the Historical Society, and we had a great conversation. He tells me that John Cox, well, first of all, there were lots of Funks and Cox around here, and still are. But he told me that John Fox was one of the almost first settlers to show up in Grayson County. It was his name was John Cox, and it was about 1750, and actually built a fort called Cox's Fort. It's no longer in existence, although the person I talked to is trying to archaeologically figure out where it is and maybe see if he can't dig down and find some old artifacts or whatever. But anyway, John Cox was someone who was here long before the Revolutionary War, and was one of the very, very first, if not the first, settlers here in Grayson County. One of the places that I remember Grandma Funk talking about a lot was Bridle Creek. I actually think this might be very close to where her farm or where she grew up. There's a church there, Methodist, even though the church was founded in 1820, this actual building is obviously much more recent than that. And then off in the distance here is another substantial structure, and I went around to the back of that brick building, stone building, and as near as I can tell, it's a school. So I don't know if it's a church-related school or a public school, but I'm quite sure that's what it is. The graveyard associated with that Bridle Creek Methodist Church is not far away, and I'm now on the hill in the middle of that cemetery. It's not a very large cemetery, but I've been taking a little stroll around it. By the way, that highway in the background is called, or that little roadway is called Bridle Creek Road. And anyway, I've taken a little stroll around here, and the interesting thing is by far huge number of headstones that are Cox, far more than any other last name. Some of them are quite old, like this one right here. I don't know what the dates of it are, but here's Polly that was in 1832 and died in 1907. And then there's also a lot of very recent ones. I don't know, I'm guessing probably at least 20% of these headstones have the name Cox. Again, far more than any other family name. and I did not see a single funk headstone. I'm still at the graveyard up on the hill here. I thought it might be a good time to take just a bit of a scan of the surrounding countryside, which is really beautiful. This time of the year, not so much because the leaves are not come out on the trees, but it's starting to green up, and you can imagine how beautiful it was in the other seasons with the greenery and the flowers that I remember Grandma Funk talking about so much, and she missed them. I decided to drive down Bridle Creek Road, and I saw a few cattle here that I just thought I'd take a shot of. You get a little sense of the landscape and the pasture and the trees. Well, as it turns out, Bridle Creek Road intersects Cox Chapel Road, and I'm going to continue driving down it. And over here is the New River that I remember Grandma Funk talking about a lot, which I'll be crossing in a moment. It's quite a very nice stream. Well, it's more than a stream. It's fairly large, as you can see by the bridge, and it runs at a pretty rapid pace. So I will continue down Cox Chapel Road. This is a little better shot of the New River. I'm on that bridge, and there's the bridge, and there's the New River heading downstream to North Carolina, I think. I'm not sure. I'll have to check that out. Well, as it turns out, just about 3 miles from Bridle Creek Church, there is a Saddle Creek Church. And wouldn't that make a lot of sense? Because if you're going to go riding, you have to have not just a bridle, but also a saddle, unless you want to do it bareback. Now, this church was established a little later. It said 1842. I find it interesting to know who the current leader of it is, if I can show that. Over to the left is the cemetery, and I took a quick pass through that. Now, interestingly, there are a sprinkling of Cox headstones, but they certainly don't dominate it like they did over on Bridle Creek, and I have yet to find a Funk headstone. After their marriage in Hot Springs, Grandpa and Grandma Funk lived for about 4 years in the Black Hills area. Their first child, our mom, was born in Piedmont in 1904. In 1908, when Mom was 4 years old, her parents migrated eastward about 250 miles, specifically to the town of Dallas. Dallas, South Dakota, not Texas. Dallas is located in the far western edge of Gregory County. During their 4 years in Gregory County, they also lived near Colomb and possibly the town of St. Charles. But Dallas was where they first landed in Gregory County. In 1912, they moved to Millette County, where they became homesteaders about 7 miles southwest of Wood, South Dakota. Our grandparents lived there then for some 16 years before heading westward to Meade County. God, I love to say the name of that county, Meade County. Taking up residence in the White Owl and Inning area of Meade County in 1928. Grandpa Funk died in Sturgis, South Dakota on February 27, 1952 at the age of 71. Grandma died February 25, 1967 at the age of 83. Here I am at the corner of Sumner Street and Main Avenue in St. Charles, South Dakota, also located in Gregory County. You'll notice that the sign on that building, that old brick building, says bank. Apparently this was once a thriving community. I remember Mother talking about St. Charles. In fact, I think her parents may have lived here for a short time and ran a hotel or boarding house or something. At this point, there is nothing left in terms of anything commercial, and just a few houses. In fact, this intersection, which once upon a time was probably very busy, is now very, very, very unbusy. Nothing there, nothing over on this side or on this side. Colomb, South Dakota is another community that I often heard my mother and sometimes my dad mention. It's located in Tripp County, just a few miles west of Dallas, South Dakota, which is where the Funks first settled. I don't know if the Funks may have lived here or worked here or something at some point in time, but I do know that it was often mentioned by Mother and sometimes Dad. I'm here in Carter, South Dakota. This is on the far western end of Tripp County, just a half a mile or so from Todd County, which is where the Rosebud Indian Reservation begins. There are 3 points minor connection between Carter and our family. The first is that when Grandma and Grandpa Funk migrated from Gregory County up to Millette County to establish their homestead, they spent one night here in a large, at that time, hotel. Another point of connection is Grandpa Funk owned 2 lots here in Carter when the town was thriving. I suspect that those lots were somehow associated with a cream station or creamery business apparently he had established here. A third thing, my father used to mention Carter frequently. I think he hung out here quite a bit. And if I recall correctly, he had money in a bank here. The bank went broke and he lost his money. Carter was really a very thriving community in the early 1900s. It had multiple banks, several doctors, a hotel, dry goods store, a pharmacy, all types of businesses. Today, that's not the case. The only business that exists in Carter, and it's an extremely important one, extremely important, is the one that you can see off in the distance. Underneath those trees. That is the Carter Bar. And I can tell you, that is a happening place. I can tell you that from personal experience. If you're ever in this part of the country, especially on a Friday or Saturday night, Carter, South Dakota is the place to be. After Mother graduated from high school here in White River, she attained a teaching certificate after going to college in Mitchell and Springfield, South Dakota. She taught at several different schools in Millette, Gregory, and Tripp counties. Bonesteel, South Dakota is located in Gregory County, South Dakota. I'm taking this because in Bonesteel, or somewhere near Bonesteel, is where Mother taught, at least one of the schools that she taught before she married Dad. One of the things that I find interesting is that so many towns out here in South Dakota are named after water towers. I'm on the west side of the main street in Whitten, South Dakota, also located in Tripp County. The reason I mention Whitten is in looking through Mother's belongings, her first bank account when she became a teacher was opened here in the Whitten Bank. I also have a check that my father had wrote that was from the Whitten Bank. So Whitten at one point was apparently the Wall Street of South Dakota, but now there is no bank and there's very little here on the main street. However, on the mural that I'm walking towards, they have a photo of what the main street of Whitten looked like in 1916. My mother would have been in the area by then, and here it is. Look closely. Perhaps you can see a Funk or someone in the photo there, although yes, there's a beer place. That would be a very likely or logical place for some of the Funks and Coxes to be. So look closely and maybe you can see a relative. I am in Wood, South Dakota, a small community in Millette County. Wood is an important part of the Cordes family history for at least 4 reasons. The first reason is that my father moved here and bought a ranch southeast of Wood a few miles. I'm not exactly sure when. It would have been shortly before the First World War began, probably 1915. He had spent the prior 10 years or more out in southwestern Wyoming working for other ranchers and as a teamster. The second reason that Wood is important is that Grandma and Grandpa Funk homesteaded here beginning in 1912. They had spent the prior 4 years in Gregory County. That is a distance of about 65 miles from here, and they moved here in 1912 when Mother would have been 8 years old. Their homestead was about 7 miles southwest of Wood. Mother grew up here in terms of her first, ages 8 through grade school, and then I don't believe she went to grade school here in Wood. I'm sure they had an old country school that they went to, or whatever it might have been called out there by their homestead shack, as she called it. And she went to high school, though, in White River, because it's my understanding that Wood did not have a high school at that point in time. The third reason Wood is important is that when Mother did graduate from high school and went off to teacher's college, or normal school as it was called then, at both Dakota Wesleyan and Mitchell and Springfield, South Dakota, she began her teaching career and taught in several schools, but the last school she taught at was called the Rankin School near Wood. And she finished her teaching career there in 1927. And the fourth reason, and perhaps the most, or not perhaps, but definitely the most important reason, is in February of that year, 1927, she met my father at a dance here in Wood. And the sparks flew, and that is probably the impetus for them starting the Wood Fire Department. I'm not absolutely certain about that. But at any rate, I do know that the romance started here in Wood, South Dakota, at a dance, and as we say, the rest is history. Here I am in downtown Omaha looking at the Douglas County Courthouse. Why is this important in family history? Well, after our parents began their whirlwind romance in the spring of 1927, it was time for Dad to ship some cattle later in the summer to Omaha to be sold. Apparently, he or they decided they might as well get married at the same time. So, at the age of 40, he and Mom, who was 22, became husband and wife here in Omaha. Well, I'm still on Farnham Street. This time I'm looking at 1403 Farnham, the big building across the street. This is the Paxton Hotel. This is where my parents spent their honeymoon. Now, it turns out this building was built in 1929, so it's a mere 88 years old. The prior hotel, or the hotel in which they stayed, would have been located here at the same location, according to the people I talked to. It had been built in the late 1880s. I believe my father used to stay there when he was single, and then that's where he and Mother also spent their honeymoon. So again, Farnham Street here in Omaha is a very important street in that in a matter of a few hours, my parents got their marriage license, walked across the street, got married, and walked presumably 3 blocks to the east and checked in to the Paxton Hotel as Mr. and Mrs. Milton Cordes. After their marriage in Omaha, our parents returned to Dad's ranch, which was southeast of Wood, South Dakota. Winter, South Dakota, the county seat of Tripp County, would be about 30 miles from Dad and Mom's ranch, but it was a much larger town than Wood, and it had a hospital. Winter is where my 2 oldest sisters, Jean and Twyla, were born. Some 3 years after my parents were married and after the births of Jean and Twyla, they left their ranch in Meade County and migrated northwest about 150 miles and purchased what was known as the Potok Ranch. Here's my brother, Kirk, standing in front of what is left of the house on the Potok Ranch. This shot was taken in June of 2017 when my 6 siblings, myself, and our extended families came together for a large family reunion in Wall, South Dakota. One of the highlights of that reunion was journeying to the Potok Ranch, which is in far eastern Meade County on the banks of the Cheyenne River. Our parents and their growing family lived here for about a dozen years until the Great Depression got the best of the ranching finances. As part of the family reunion, my oldest sister Jean had compiled some important information on the Potook Ranch and some of her memories. Unfortunately, on that day in June of 2017, the wind was blowing too hard to hear what Jean had to say, but she also wrote the information down and has provided a copy to me. So let me read what Jean had to say. Unfortunately, after reading what Jean had written, I realized I did misspeak at one point. She had written that our father worked in Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado when he was in his 20s. I erred by saying he did that during the 1920s. Wow, it does feel good to be back home. John Milton Christian Cordes was born May 31st, 1887 in Dakota Territory. He grew up on a ranch near Box Elder, South Dakota. He left home at an early age to become a cattleman. He was in Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado in the early 1920s. He headed back to South Dakota and ranched in Millette County. He was married in 1927 to Hallie Funk, a local school teacher. The first baby was born in 1929, the second in 1930. Dad decided he needed a bigger ranch and land was not available in his area and school would be a problem. He sold his Millette County property to Rito del Plano Cattle Company of New Mexico. I wonder how they communicated. Through them, he purchased the C.K. Howard property known as the Potook, located in the northwest one-half section 24, Township 4, Range 14 in Meade County. C.K. Howard started the Potook Ranch in 1883. He ranched from 1893 to 1920 when he either sold out or was forced out. The ranch traded hands a few times between 1910 and 1920. At that time, about 1920, the Rito del Plano Cattle Company from Santa Fe, New Mexico, bought the mortgage for $114,000 and $114,765. They owned it from then until Dad purchased it in March 1930. The deal was closed through the First National Bank of Minnesota. Dad, Mom, and the two girls relocated. The ranch had 2,974 acres of deeded land and 4,000 acres of leased land. It came with 200 head of herd cows, some horses, and machinery. The ranch had lots of trees, a creek, and was near the Cheyenne River. Dad brought two hired men with him, Hank and Scott. There had been a first-class home on the place with electricity and running water, but it burned down during a storm. The house we lived in was much smaller, a kitchen, dining area, living room, and only one bedroom. As the family grew, Dad moved in a small building for a bedroom where the older kids slept. It was fun sometimes, but it was cold in the winter. We slept under lots of blankets and an old horsehide coat that was Dad's. It was so heavy but warm. We had to go back and forth to the big house each morning, sunny, rainy, snowy, or whatever. We would get a weekly bath in the kitchen. Mom would heat water on the wood stove and used a wash tub for a bathtub. She would start with the youngest kid and work up. Somehow, I was always last. And baths were on Saturday night. School was 5 miles away at Dalzell. Mom taught Twyla and me for the first 2 years, and we would go to Dalzell every 6 weeks for a test. We had some good teachers and missed very little school. Dad would take a run at the big hill with his car, and we would get there. One teacher was Lucille Hopkins, who later married Dad's hired man, Earl Ferguson. Dad always had a garden and raised chickens. Mom hated the smell of scalded chickens, but cleaned a lot of them and could make great fried chicken. We kids helped a little with chores. I remember hanging clothes on the line the right way. One time, while gathering eggs, a bull snake crawled in a nest, ate an egg, and then crawled through a hole to the next nest and ate another egg and couldn't get back out of the hole. Of course, we called on Dad to help out. Dad would go up to Spring Draw and get a load of water for our cistern with a wagon and team of horses. We kids would sit on the back of the wagon and we were to watch when the tank was full. Dad would be checking on cows. The team of horses were named Lena and Mabel, and it seemed like it took forever for the tank to fill. We had a swing hung from a big tree that was fun, played in the creek, and had dogs at different times. I remember Jack and Googie. Googie had one big eye and one little eye. Our milk cows were Fighty and Big Knee. A couple horses for kids named Pickaninny and Peanuts. Dad had many hired hands: Earl Johnston, the Wilson boys, Ferdinand and Howard Fisher, Frank Seeley, and Earl Ferguson, to name a few. Hallie hired the Finner girls, Ruby, Polly, and Hazel, to help her. Dad was elected a Meade County Commissioner in 1934 and served 12 years. The commissioner job helped to buy groceries. His check was $40 a month. Mr. Haley, the grocery store owner, would throw in gum and candy for we kids. In the late 1930s, the Depression was on and Dad couldn't make the payments to the Federal Land Bank, and unbeknownst to him, a neighbor bought the place. We had to move up on the flat to the Moorhead place. Our life on the Pothook was over, but it had been a good one. When I look back, we had a great childhood. Dad was a cattleman through and through. He listened to the radio station, WNAX, for news and read the Sioux City Journal and figured numbers day after day on the margins of the paper. He was even-tempered. If you were out of line too much, you would get swatted with his leather glove. It didn't hurt much. Dad said he only recognized two songs, the Star-Spangled Banner, because everyone stood up, and Home Sweet Home, because everyone put on their coat and left. He also said, don't marry the neighbor boy and get at least 50 miles from home, and stay away from a good dancer because they only have brains in their feet. So I followed his advice. Wilbur lived 70 miles away and he didn't dance. Mom would get a little more upset when you didn't do things right. She was a great cook. Together things got done and we had a good life. We all graduated from high school and made our own way. I thank Jean for letting me share her remarks. I'm sure I didn't do as good a job as she did. Now, after she finished sharing at the Pothook that day, there were some questions and answers, and the wind remains a problem, but I think if you listen carefully, you can capture most of the dialogue.
Probably got time for a quick question or two. If any of you young ones want to ask questions, or the old timers know everything, so we don't have any questions. Any quick questions for anyone, for Jean or any of us?
Can we have a copy of that?
Oh, I do have some copies. Yeah, I do have.
Yeah.
It was a great place to grow up.
Did you girls have to milk the cows?
No, we didn't. Dad always had a hired man.
Oh, I see.
And we didn't do much of that. We had to help pick chickens.
Yeah.
Some of those. Yeah. We didn't milk.
Where did the hired help stay?
Well, there was a bunkhouse back here.
It's still there.
Well, I don't think it is anymore. And Mom did not want us going in there because when you went in there, it smelled like tobacco and dirty clothes. You know, she didn't like us in there. But yeah, they stayed back there, and Mom fed them all, of course. Yeah. But no, it was a good place to grow up.
kind of there.
Are there a lot of
And
grasshoppers down here when you guys, do you recall that?
Different times.
Different times.
Yeah, not steady. No. Dad had some wonderful gardens. Yeah. And Mom
Creek
canned
actually
mussels.
runs it's live all the time.
Yeah.
Unless it quit here just recently, but normally this creek would run clear out into those meadows.
Yeah.
So that was a kind of
And then Dad would butcher a critter and hang it in a tree down there, kind of in the fall. And then when Mom wanted a roast, she'd have to tell Dad, go cut a chunk of meat for me for dinner. And, but it didn't. And if it was going to get too warm and might spoil, she canned lots. She even fried hamburgers and canned them.
Wow.
She did a lot of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
How upset was Dad or both parents when they lost this
Well,
place?
you know, if they were, they didn't show it. They didn't rant and rave and
Yeah.
think the world was going to end. I don't really know how that Moorhead place, how we moved to that so easily. But the worst thing about that, it was full of bed bugs, and oh my God.
Oh.
Fumigated. She just about killed us all. But she got rid of them. Yeah, and I don't know how he got acquainted with the area enough, because I remember the highway superintendent and different people would come down here and visit with him about roads and things. You know.
I had another question too. Are all the trees natural or were they planted in trees?
No, I think they're all natural. Yeah. There was a bush on the other side of the house that had terrible thorns on it, but it had kind of pretty blossoms. And my mother hated that thing because it was so stickery. It was kind of pretty.
We're now some 2 to 3 miles from the Potook Ranch, and I'm standing on what came to be known as the Cordes Ranch. This is the ranch where our parents moved once they left the Potook in 1942, and where so many of my own childhood memories happened. Right behind me is where the original ranch home stood before our mother moved it into New Underwood in the late 1970s. This is the bunkhouse which Dad bought and moved to the ranch from the town of Wasta in the early 1950s. Sometimes it was used by a hired man, sometimes when we had company, and sometimes just as a place for us kids to hang out and play. We'll take a tour of the inside in just a few minutes. Before checking out the bunkhouse here, there's a much better shot of the house that Carolyn and Marvin built as they were operating the ranch for several decades. In 1955, my sister Carolyn and her husband Marvin Anders became involved in the Cordes ranching operation and initially lived in a mobile home on the Cheyenne River. In 1961, they moved to the ranch headquarters, built this house, and lived there until Marvin died in 2011. Marvin was an incredibly important, special, and influential person in my life, sort of a hybrid between a father and a big brother. And then over here, that barn or shed-like structure or building that's white, it was on the ranch all the years that I was growing up. At that point in time, though, it was red, and it had my father's brand, the XL bar, painted underneath it. And I've spent a lot of time in that old barn doing all kinds of interesting things, some legitimate, others not legitimate maybe. And it hasn't changed very much, nor has this bunkhouse. You guys can just kind of scope it out a little bit first and then we'll... Okay, so now we're inside the bunkhouse, and of all of the things on our tour today, for me anyway, the thing that has changed the least, the very least, is the inside and the outside, for that matter, of the bunkhouse. Some things are a little different. I think they might have a new floor, but this old paneling, wood paneling is the same. These photos or paintings of Old West activities, and including the ones over here about the Franklin vaccine supplies for livestock. I remember those came off of calendars, and they're probably more than 60 years old. And this little old propane stove here was installed. There's no insulation in this building, and so in the winter it would just get brutally frigid, and we didn't leave this on all day, and so we'd come out here to go to bed and it would just be brutally cold. But you could get it started with a match up here. This is a little matchbox holder that I made when I was in grade school, and so I would grab a match and we would get that little stove fired up, and in just a short amount of time it was very toasty and comfortable in here. This dresser, I think, I know has been here forever, and this, as well as this little wash stand and the wash basin and the bucket. So, except for maybe a nice shiny pail and a new electric fan, I don't think anything's changed in here. Oh, here, this chair is also one from when I was growing up. Nice solid wooden chair. I remember those kinds of chairs very well. We had a whole set of those. I'm now at the ranch of Rod Anders, my nephew, who runs this ranch with his wife Kelly. Their ranch is some 5 to 6 miles from the Cordes Ranch where I lived while going to grade school. As it turns out, the one-room school which I attended was closed after I finished the 8th grade in 1957. At some point, it was moved to Rod and Kelly's ranch, and I'm eager to take a tour of it. Well, as you can tell, it's fallen in some disrepair, but this is pretty much exactly, including the floor, I believe, the way it was when I was here. We would typically have, during my 8 years, probably no fewer than 6 students and no more than 10 or maybe 12 in here with a single teacher who would teach all of us. And one of the interesting things is that we would always learn from those students that were a grade or two above us, so that we one of the positive things, I think, of the one-room school with a single teacher and everyone in the same classroom is you picked up stuff from the kids that were in grades higher than you. You see these brackets up here, this black bracket. I remember when I was probably in the 3rd or 4th grade, a salesman came along and decided I needed to put fire extinguishers in the school. And there was a little bulb light container that sat on top of that black metal circle there. And allegedly, anyway, when the fire started, it was going to get hot enough and it was supposed to release some kind of fire retardant into the school if no one was in it. Now that never ever happened. But what else? I think this piano was probably there when I was a student. We had an old piano. Oh yeah, and here's a blackboard. A little bit of it left, and that's the original blackboard. I'm quite sure of that. Oh yeah. So we would go up to the blackboard and do our multiplication or whatever we needed to do at the instruction of the teacher, and I had some great teachers.
And you can look right here.
During those 8 years. What's that?
You look right there. There's some multiplications right there.
Oh yeah, there's some of the blackboard on display. So anyway, that's the story on the one-room school where I and many of my siblings spent time. When I was growing up at the family ranch, our post office address was Dalzell. But Elm Springs was our big town, population 7, as I recall. It was a center of community activity with a small grocery store, a church, and a community center. The community center is still in active use, and I'm not sure what all purposes it now serves. However, when I was growing up, it was used as a polling place for elections and where the one-room schools convened for their annual Christmas pageant. I even remember being here to watch a movie about John Dillinger that was hosted by some type of traveling movie man. Also, when I was teaching school near here one year, I wanted the students to have a place to play basketball. Repurposing it for basketball involved Marvin helping me install basketball hoops. That turned into a real disaster when the ladder collapsed and the backboard fell on top of Marvin. But true to form, he never lost his temper with me. And perhaps his most important purpose when I was growing up, at least once I was in my teens, were the wild and woolly country dances on many Saturday nights. It's my understanding those dances are a thing of the past, but I'll never forget all the fun I had at them. Let's go inside. We're now inside of the community building, and the interesting history are some of these hand-painted signs that you can see all around the perimeter on the inside here of businesses that were thriving at one point in time. Maybe a few of them still are, but in many cases the businesses have now closed down. In fact, the communities themselves that they represented have closed down. You'll see a reference to Dalzell, South Dakota. You'll see reference to Owanka, South Dakota. Both of those communities don't even exist anymore. But then over here in this direction is where the stage was, in which the Christmas plays happened, and this is also the area where the dancing occurred. And then, of course, the band set up here. So that's part of the history and the functions of the community center. We'll go downstairs now, and I'll talk a little bit about what all went on down there. Okay, we're now in the basement of the community hall, and during a Saturday night dance, the band would stop playing around midnight or a little before, and you would find the prettiest girl that would have anything to do with you, and you would bring her down here, and you would buy her supper, which was served from that kitchen over in the back there. And you would come and sit and try to impress her and make sure that she remembered you. And then after supper was over, you'd go back and the band would start playing, and it might play until 2 o'clock in the morning, or even 3, I suppose, if they passed the hat and got enough money for the band to continue for another hour. So that was what this room was used for, at least during the dance nights. Also, there was a big table over here in the corner where the men, 6 or 8 at a time, would play poker. I remember my father very well sitting over there playing poker. He liked to play poker. He was a good poker player. What else happened down here? Oh yeah, there was also, before supper was declared, these benches would get moved over to the side of to clear out an open space. And there were roller skates that were stored in that little closet-like thing over there. And so the kids would put on roller skates, and this would also serve as a roller skating rink during those dances. I think that was about all, other than to say you back to having supper and your supper date coming down here. You could also take your supper date and go during the intermission, if you will, sit in the car and eat your supper there. But that was kind of viewed negatively by some people, including my mother, that was a little bit risque. Now, and therefore, of course, I would never, ever did that. But some of my friends, of course, did. This is the non-denominational Elm Springs Community Church, which remains active thanks to community support and a traveling preacher. When I was growing up, Sunday church services were intermittent, but one regular event was a week-long summer Bible school that was held here. Also, this is where my beloved Marvin is buried. I think of him so often with such fondness and appreciation. This yellow building is a new addition to the church property here at Elm Springs. It arrived in total disrepair, but through a huge community effort, it was repaired and refurbished and dedicated in 2016 as the Children's Chapel. But in one of its prior lives, it was the one-room Lynn School. And interestingly for me, I happened to teach that very school in 1962 and 63. So the Children's Chapel has special meaning to me. And I'm delighted the building is once again dedicated to the young people in the Elm Springs community. As part of its dedication in 2016, I and others were asked to write about our memories of the building. And if anyone is interested in what I wrote, just contact me and I'll be happy to share my memory. I'm now in Sturgis, South Dakota, specifically at 1611 Davenport Street, a beautiful Victorian house on the National Register of Historic Places and known as the Macmillan House. That's the official name. However, to the Cordes family, we called it either our house in town or the Davenport Street house. Our parents bought this house in 1944 and owned it until 1963. The reason it was purchased was because Sturgis is where all 7 of the Cordes children went to high school. Because Sturgis was 72 miles from the family ranch, our mother would spend the academic year living in Sturgis at this house, helping her flock of children navigate their high school years. The current owner, Francine Severson, has been kind enough to allow me to take some of the footage outside of the house and then to also visit with me on camera and to share some of her knowledge of the history of this locally famous house. In return, Francine asked me to compile the nearly 20-year period of Cordes ownership and occupancy. Again, if anyone is interested in what I compiled, I will be happy to share. I'm now inside the Macmillan House at 1611 Davenport Street, seated in the kitchen across from Francine, who is going to take 10 to 12 minutes to share with me the highlights of what she knows about the history of the Macmillan House and her own experience there. Okay, it's September 16th, 2017, and I've had the delightful half hour or so having a tour by the current occupant of 1611 Davenport Street in Sturgis, Francie, and she is now willing to share with me a bit about the house. But been very.
You know more about the house than I do.
Well,
apparently.
I did have a couple of things that I pointed out to Francie that she didn't know about, and so I have added to the institutional knowledge of 1611 Davenport. But Francie, one of her biggest accomplishments has been to put this on the registry of officially it's the National.
The National Register of Historic Places.
Okay.
With the Department of Interior.
Okay, and thank you for doing that because it deserves to be on there. And,
It does.
And in the process of doing all that research and putting all that documentation together, the house was built when?
In 1886, but the abstract dates back to 1882 as the land was acquired and prepared for building.
Right. And then who was the original builder or owner?
Macmillan, and of course I can't think of his first name. If I stepped outside, I could show you the plaque. Isn't that terrible? Anyway, but they oftentimes will refer to it as the Macmillan House.
Macmillan House, okay.
The second owner was a much more colorful character and added a lot of history to the house. The Jack Hale family.
Jack Hale family. Okay. And I had shared with Francie that my parents bought the house in roughly 1943 or 44, something like that, and owned it for almost 20 years. And then you purchased it when?
I don't really remember. A long time ago.
Okay, a long time ago, yeah. Okay. In the process of putting together the materials for the listing, was there anything that stood out that was of particular interest?
Well, it was overwhelming initially. I think I looked at that process a good 10 years ago and just kind of threw up my hands over time because it's just a lot of paperwork. But for me, what was probably the most fun was that over the years, even before all of that was happening, people will stop at the house. They still do.
Really?
People who have lived here. And, could we go inside? We'd like to see it. And so over the course of that time and those contacts, those people had their stories and their pictures. Yes. And they shared them all with me. And I just kept amassing those things. And knowing that one day I would do something with them, and that was always, I think, probably that was always the push for me. That even when I would get discouraged and think I'm never going to get this done, I would, every time I got into those folders and files, it would just begin to fascinate me all over again. Right. So ultimately, it got done.
Well, again, thank you for doing that. And to the extent that my siblings and family will be watching some of this, we have an obligation or an opportunity to think about pictures and so on that we have that could be added to the collection. And I do intend to write up my own memories of the years that I lived here to share with you, and I'll try to get others to do the same. So,
that would be so wonderful. I mean. One of the things that I, like you, believe is that we have an obligation to preserve and present the history, and without people sharing their stories, that just kind of goes by the wayside. For me, I grew up in a family that enjoyed its past and kept it close and shared it with kids, and it was always an important part of family. So I can remember when the kids and I were shopping for a home in Sturgis, and at that time there was one of, it seemed like one of two kinds of places available. One was your pretty standard matchbox house. At least one of two kinds that we could afford. The matchbox houses that were pretty standard. Or there were ones that we couldn't afford, just way out of our budget. There was nothing, that had much character. And it was almost exactly this time of the year. And the kids, I'd gone to get the kids from school and said, look, we've got another house to go look at. And in the beginning, that was fun. But by that time, it wasn't fun anymore. And so they just harumped the whole way. And actually, the house that we looked at is just down the block from this one. And we drove by it, and I said, oh, I'm not even interested enough to go see. And it was at the end of the day, it was just dusk. And we circled around the block, and we came down Davenport, heading north. And it was twilight, and the big stained glass windows were lit up. Somebody had the hall light on in this house. And I pointed to that house, and I said, now look at that. Why can't something like that be for sale that we could afford? And we went home. The next morning, the realtor called me and she said, Francie, I've got a house for you to go see. And I said, well, the kids and I drove by that already. We don't even want to go inside. No. She said, this is a different one. We just listed it last night at 5 o'clock. She drove me right up to the house that I had said, now there, why can't something... And as soon as, I didn't say anything to her, I didn't say a word, and that's not true. The first thing I said to her was, I can't afford that house, I couldn't afford the taxes. And she said, oh yes you can. So we walked up the front step, and that's where you said, your family used that entrance all the time.
We did, yeah.
And we walked in, and I didn't have to go any further. I knew right then and there that was a house for me.
How wonderful. That was almost magical.
It was.
And how prescient the night before.
Right. So, we had no more than gone down the street with me saying to the kids, there, why can't something like that ever be for sale? And the next morning...
The next day, it was.
It was.
How? Oh, I love that story. Love that story.
So it didn't, it was just wonderful. Yeah. It was wonderful. And I knew too, the people who had owned it before, Barb Eddington, was delightful lady. Delightful. I loved every part of her taking me through the house. She too had such an affinity for this home. Something that she said she would walk by as a young girl in school and say, I'm going to live in that house someday. So, it's so many people like yourselves too, have stories. Yeah, right. That's what makes the house so wonderful. Yeah.
Gee, thanks for sharing all of that. As you think about the years that you've lived here, what has brought you the most joy, and maybe what's been the most frustrating or challenging part of being in a home like this?
Well, the joy of it is because it's been shared, by so many people, and they continue to come, because they remember. Or people who have never lived here, they will stop and say, what an amazing house, tell us about it. And the history that is behind this house and the people who have lived here. Jack Hale, for example, he was a character. He was a bushwhacker. He was a rancher, a horse trader, a politician, a Democrat, if you can believe that.
Oh,
really, from this part of the country. Mingled with Seth Bullock, was a part of Teddy's Rough Riders. Had Tom Mix in for dinner. He was just a character, and there's so many people like that were a part of this house. So that's, there's always a dialogue going on about this house. That's what I enjoy the most about it. Its steadfastness, its history. I just like it. Yeah. I feel good in this house. I've had people come in and say, as soon as I step in the house, it just feels like a home. Yeah. So I've enjoyed that most. The things that I haven't enjoyed is that, well, it's not that I haven't enjoyed it, but it's difficult to maintain a house like this if you're on a limited income or an income that just will only go so far. Right. So most of my resources have been spent just keeping it together. Yeah. But it's been okay. It was built so well when it was built that, a good coat of paint and just stopping a leak will take care of most things. Yeah. So, and the challenge of that, nothing fits in this house. You can't. Contractors come in and they shake their heads, And nothing's ever as it seems. You
Yeah,
start a
right,
project,
right.
it seems like it's pretty straightforward, but it turns out to be kind of challenging.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay.
would
Understand
be
that. Yeah. So, well, listen. I just want to thank you again for being so gracious and opening the home up for me to have a tour, and I also want to thank you for the love that is palpable for how you feel about this home, and that makes me feel good. So, thank you.
You know, and let me thank you before you shut that off, because I'm not a very I'm not a very visity kind of person, and I will put people off oftentimes who might want to take a trip through this house. And had you not kept in touch with me, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I would not have had the delightful time with you this afternoon, going through the house, listening to you talk about your memories. Thank you so much for persisting with me.
Well, you're most welcome.
Your patience is awesome.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad it was mutually beneficial, right?
Very much so.
All right. Okay. You have a good rest of the day.
You too.
Bye.
I'm now in New Underwood, South Dakota, near the back entrance to the ranch house that Mother moved into New Underwood from the ranch in the late 1970s. A man by the name of Delbert Beck bought the house from Mom in 1994. Mr. Beck knew Mom before he bought the house and has fond memories of her. He said lots of people loved our mother. Although Mom sold the house in 1994, she had not lived in it for about 3 years, as she had moved into the Sunny Haven Apartments in New Underwood. Mr. Beck says that he and his wife have spent about $30,000 over the years on upgrading the house with some of the big ticket items, including plumbing, wiring, and siding. What is in this screenshot is something Mother would probably not approve of. It's an addition. This small structure is a gazebo, which houses a hot tub. Behind that is a garage that has been added on as well. But this is the back door to Mother's home, basically unchanged since it was moved in from the ranch. Mr. Beck says in 1988. He's lived in it since, for 23 years, which would mean 1994. The first owner, he bought it. He bought it from Mother, or at least through the realtor. He's the only owner since Mother lived here, and he's enjoyed living here, and has done a lot of improvements. And it makes me feel good to know that he has enjoyed it so much and has kept it up in such great shape. Speaking of great shape, I am in great mental, spiritual, and emotional shape after completing this geographic tour of family history, beginning in Chicago and ending here in New Underwood, with many spots in between. I happen to believe that life is more meaningful if you have an understanding and an appreciation for your historical and geographical roots. And the connections I feel to my parents and extended family continue to pay huge dividends to me. Those connections don't always come easily or even naturally, and they often require some hard work. But the benefits and blessings are worth the work and overwhelm any of the rough spots. At any rate, after Mother moved from this house, she spent time in assisted living type arrangements in both New Underwood and Rapid City before her death on May 30th, 2002 at age 97. After leaving the ranch, my dad spent time with Mother at the Davenport Street house in Sturgis and in a nursing home in New Underwood before his death at age 87 in the Veterans Administration Hospital in Sturgis on July 9th, 1974. Both Mom and Dad are buried at Mountain View Cemetery in Rapid City. It's been a special journey for me to go back and trace their footprints over their lifetime and that of my grandparents. But it is now time to look at the next generation they created. So let's turn to the conversations I've had with my 6 siblings that I'm really eager to share.